Hey, what's up guys, Adam here, and in this video we're going to be talking about the current state of 4K. Now, as you know, we had CES early in January, and it's always a good idea to try and make these videos after CES because it gives us a good idea about what devices are going to be released later on this year or in the not too distant future. So the best way to go ahead and assess the current state of 4K is to actually break it down into the available 4K devices. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the available devices and the actual current state or their current progress within the 4K system. So starting off with 4K smartphones. So 4K smartphones can actually be broken down into two separate categories. So we can have 4K smartphones, i.e. phones that record in 4K, or 4K smartphones as in phones that have a 4K display. So there's quite a few phones that actually record in 4K. I mean the iPhone 6, the LG G4 and the Samsung Galaxy S6 and S6 Edge are just a few examples of phones that actually do record in 4K. In terms of 4K phones that have a 4K display, there is pretty much no phones apart from the Sony Xperia Z5. That is pretty much the only official phone out there that actually has a 4K display. Now, my personal opinions on phones having a 4K display is that it really doesn't make any kind of financial sense or even any physical sense to have a 4K display within the smartphone. Mainly because a lot of smartphones normally sit between the 4-inch to 6-inch range in terms of display, and those pixels are going to be so compact that it's going to be really difficult to even tell the difference between maybe a 4K display and even a 2.5K display. And really the disadvantages of having a 4K display on a smartphone are mainly down to its performance. So if you have a 4K display in a smartphone, of course it's going to be really hitting the battery life because you've got to power and drive all those pixels. It's going to be 4 times the resolution of a 1080p phone. And also it's going to have some notable differences in terms of the performance of the OS. So given that a lot of the actual smartphone manufacturers out there or people who are creating applications aren't really optimizing these applications to be running on a 4K smartphone. So of course you're going to get quite a few glitches and a lot of slowness within the actual OS when it's running on a 4K display. So you're going to get quite a few noticeable drawbacks in performance if you have a 4K display on a smartphone. And overall the actual hardware, unless the actual hardware in the phone can actually back up running a 4K display, I really don't think it's worth it. And of course the actual physical aspect of having a 4K display on a smartphone really means that you're not going to be able to see the actual difference. I mean, complete agreement when it comes to actually phones having a 4K recording capability, because of course you can go ahead and actually get that 4K footage and play and upscale it onto a full size 22-inch monitor and therefore get the full immersion of a 4K display. But having to look at a 4K display like this all cramped up into a 6-inch form factor, even a 4-inch form factor, it's just not really a good utilization of those pixels. So I'm not really on board with having with phones having a 4K display, but I'm definitely on board with phones having a 4K recordable capabilities. So moving on to the tablets now. So again, there are pretty much no tablets out there apart from the Dell XPS, and it's kind of more like a netbook or a laptop as opposed to being used as a tablet. But again, similar to all kinds of mobile devices, really having a 4K display on those type of devices again doesn't really make any financial sense in the terms that again it's going to be a huge drawback on the performance of a mobile device, whether it be a phone or a tablet, because meaning you have a 4K display again on a tablet means, of course, although you have more space and more real estate, it means you also have to increase the actual hardware into that tablet so it can easily run 4K without any of the performance issues. Now, as mentioned before, the only really 4K tablet out there that actually has a 4K display is the Dell XPS, and it's mainly used more as a notebook, which kind of makes more sense. But we're having a mobile 4K device really doesn't make any sense. I personally think having the 4K display on a mobile device. I mean, I have a Nexus 9 and that has just over a 2.5K display and it's purely high resolution. I mean, you can look really close to that tablet and not notice any pixels. I mean, take a look at the Apple lineup with the 13-inch Retina MacBook Pro and the 15-inch Retina MacBook Pro. Those not even 4K displays, and looking at those at that kind of size gives you an extremely crispy image. I mean, that's why they call it the Retina MacBook Pro lineup, because if you look really close at those type of laptops, you're not going to be able to see any pixels. So I can't really justify cramming even more pixels in there just for the sake of it being a 4K display, because you're not going to be able to see any difference at that kind of size, especially at 13 13 and 15 inches. Okay, so moving on to the 4K cameras, and of course I'm going to talk about the 4K cameras from a more consumer grade point of view, because of course there's quite a few, a big variety of different 4K cameras out there, but a lot of them are for the high end kind of market. So for this purpose of this video, I'm going to be covering some of the ones that were released at CES and some of the 4K cameras that are already available. So the first one that we have is the Panasonic GH4, a great low-end 4K camera. It's been used by a lot of YouTubers starting to pick up that camera now. Yeah, I believe it comes with a 14mm to 55mm lens, which is wide enough to get all those really wide shots, and of course close enough to get a good shot at the field. And overall, I've heard it's just a really great camera to go ahead and start off with, especially if you're going to be upgrading to your very first 4K camera. So at CES, we've also seen a wide range of cameras, especially from Nikon. So Nikon has come out with the D5. Now the D5, the problem with the D5 is that, yes, it records at 4K, but it only records at 4K with a limit of 3 minutes. So it's not really going to be very useful if you want to try and get, really long video shots. It's mainly only going to be really useful if you're going to be trying to get, really small 10, 30-second kind of pans for B-roll maybe. But for a general use, the Nikon D5 is not really going to be usable at a 4K resolution with only being able to record at 3 minutes. So it's not really worth that kind of investment. But Nikon also have come out with the Nikon D500, which kind of combats, and I think a lot of people are going to go more for the Nikon D500, especially videographers, because of course it allows you to go ahead and record at 4K at 30 frames for a lot longer than just 3 minutes. Okay, so moving on now to 4K TVs. Now, I remember about maybe 2012 at CES or even 2013 at CES where 4K TVs were well over that £1,000 mark. But now we're in 2016, and even CES, and not even just CES, I mean loads of outlets now are showing us that 4K TVs have dropped well below £1,000 or $1,000. I mean, in the UK, the cheapest 4K TV you can go ahead and get here, I believe it's from Bush. It costs you around about £350. So we're starting to see now a wide range, at least every single manufacturer, at least every single popular manufacturer now, whether it be Sony, Panasonic, Bosch, you name it, LG, are all coming out with some sort of 4K panel. And as the years go by, the prices are just going to keep dropping and dropping slow. Now, the issue that a lot of people are going to say with these 4K TVs is that, of course, there isn't really that much 4K footage out there. Still even at this stage now, the only really outlets for 4K are going to be YouTube and Netflix. So unless you're going to be doing those main two things apart from gaming, of course, you're still not going to be able to get the most 4K footage. So, I mean, even still, a TV in this day and age is still only broadcasted around about 720p and really on a rare occasion at 1080p. So broadcasting 4K content over a broadcast TV network is going to be incredibly difficult to do. I really don't think at this current stage or at this current state of 4K that we're not going to be seeing any broadcasted 4K footage. I think it's all going to be more online platform based through either YouTube or Netflix, or maybe sometime in the line also going to be Vimeo as well. But in terms of the pricing of 4K TVs, I can definitely say there has been a major decrease in the overall price for 4K TVs, and therefore they're becoming a lot more affordable than they used to be around 3 years ago. So the final devices I'm going to be talking to you guys about is going to be 4K monitors, probably the most popular 4K panel that people are going out to buy. Now, the issue that a lot of 4K panels had in the earlier stages is that they were 30 Hertz and had a TN panel, which didn't really suit anybody because, of course, they had a TN panel, so yeah, they would be okay for gaming if they had a higher frame rate. I mean, 30 Hertz for gaming is just an absolute no-no. So, of course, people could not be using the 4K panels at 30 Hertz for gaming. And they were also not very good for content creation because they had a TN panel, which is definitely not good for content creation. You really need the IPS panel. So they weren't really good for anyone else who was going to be doing gaming or doing any sort of content creation. I mean, they were only really going to be useful people maybe doing productivity work, maybe working in a business where they want to have loads of graphs open, they want to have loads of stocks and shares open on the display. But it's not really going to be, well, they weren't really good for people who wanted to do any sort of content creation or any sort of gaming. But in the recent years now, we're starting to see a lot more of the 4K IPS 60 Hz panels coming out at a lot more affordable prices, because even though that there were cheaper monitors, they just weren't really suited for a lot of people. So the prices of these high-end 4K IPS panels were still up until maybe last year still sitting at around about just under £1,000, especially the ones from Dell and Asus. So still, I'm glad we're hoping to see now a huge drop in the overall price of the 4K IPS 60 Hz monitor. Now, I remember making a video, I think it was early last year, about the Korean panels that are available. So there are quite a few Korean panels out there. I think I was talking last year about the 2560 by 1440p Korean panels that had been released, and they came at really low prices. But I think now the Korean company is actually coming out with some 4K panels now. They're going to be priced around £300 and below, depending on the actual stock of the panel itself. So there's going to be quite a few panels released from Korea that are in 4K, have a PLS, which is kind of similar to IPS, and they're also going to have 60 Hz as well. So those are going to be the ideal panels for a very low price if you're someone who really wants to go ahead and get yourself a 4K panel. So anyway, that's pretty much been the current state of 4K 2016. I hope you found it useful and I hope you enjoyed it. Anyway guys, it's been Adam here. Thank you for watching. Take care, and of course I'll see you guys in the next tech video. Bye for now.